Hi everybody, this is Corey from Technology Elevated SmartCarb. Today we're going to fill the KTM sized hole in our installation video lineup. And what better bike than the last of its kind 2019 300 XC. As most of you know, 2019 was the last year of the KTM Husky carbureted enduros. These bikes are highly sought after today, and we're actually lucky to get our hands on one. So we want to give a huge thanks to Letco Cycles for letting us borrow it. And as we understand it, it's already been sold. So if you're looking for one, please keep looking. Okay, so for the KTM Husky 200, 250, and 300 Enduros, we normally recommend the 36 millimeter as it favors the bottom end Enduro type characteristics. But we do also offer the 38 millimeter size, which gives a different power delivery, more geared toward the top end, sustained desert riding, snow bikes, that type of thing. Today we're going to go ahead and install a 36 millimeter onto this bike to prioritize the low speed or bottom end for enduro type riding. It will provide very crisp and clean running. The 36 also gives the best fuel economy of the two different sizes. The larger 38 millimeter will prioritize again the top end supermoto type applications. When Husky moved into the new bikes in 2017 with the counterbalance motor, they went with the 38 millimeter Mikuni TMXX as the stock carburetor. Primarily before that, these bikes came with the smaller 36 millimeter Keihin PWKs, which tend to suit the engine characteristics of these bikes a little bit better. We believe that some of the tuning troubles with the stock 38 millimeter Mikuni are most likely related to it being just a little bit on the large size for this application. Okay, to begin the installation process, we're going to start by removing the currently installed fuel system. As we noted earlier, this bike originally came equipped with the 38 millimeter TMXX Mikuni carburetor. In this case, the previous owner has installed the 36 millimeter Keihin Airstriker PWK. Both of these squiddly looking things are likely to be found on your bike, but we're going to go ahead and swap this one out for the SmartCarb today. Okay, we're going to begin that process by removing this side panel, the seat, the tank, and the silencer in order to lift the subframe so that we have plenty of access to the fuel system. This has an aftermarket silencer attached to it, but the bolt pattern is the same as the factory, so you're going to need to remove these two longer screws to get the silencer out of the way so that we can lift the subframe. This bike was equipped with a lot of bulletproof design stuff, which is really high quality, nice things. And so, as you might note on here, they've got the link protector. They've got some of their radiator guards, a few nice knickknacks that they've added to this bike. We understand this bike has been sold, so some lucky customer will wind up with this. The Link bikes, the XCs, are a little bit different than the XCW bikes in the way that the tank is attached. We don't remove the side panels. These are all attached to the tank, so no need to remove these small screws or anything like that. Because we're using the bulletproof design guards, these are attached with rubber fasteners, in which case on a stock bike you would need to remove several bolts up here to get the tank free. We're going to go ahead and remove the fuel line as we prepare to take the tank off. Sometimes a little drizzle of fuel comes out of there, so we like to kind of keep that stuff cleaned up. Often I'll just push the hose onto the petcock paddle so I don't drag it off while I'm getting the tank off the bike. Now we're going to want to go ahead and loosen our clamps, specifically on the air boot side, of the air filter side of the air boots, so that we can lift the subframe. I'll go ahead and remove the large Torx screws that are holding the subframe to the frame. We also need to loosen the pivot bolts. Okay, so before we pivot everything up, I'm going to just pull this back far enough to get this clamp out of the way so that I don't drag the clamp past the shock spring, and they've got a chain guard on here. It'll just make our process a little easier. We won't damage anything. So I'm going to go ahead and lift that up, leave the clamp right there, and slip it out of the way. And we'll go ahead and lift the subframe to give ourselves plenty of clearance. You can use the mud flap to hold it up, but I normally will tighten just one of the pivot bolts, just so there's no pressure against anything, and it'll hold it in place while we work on it. Okay, so now we'll release the front clamp enough to let us rock the carb off to the side, just enough that we can start getting the screws out of the cap. There's also a small retainer down here, a bail that holds all the hoses in. I'm going to loosen that just a little bit so that I can drag those hoses out of there when the carb comes out. You can reach right under the chain and get to that pretty handily. Just loosen it enough to let it wiggle. Okay, so as with all Keihin Mikuni carburetors, some use an Allen wrench screw on top, and some will use a Phillips head. In any case, use a quality tool in order to loosen those. If you strip one out, your 30-minute job has turned into a half-day deal. Those are very tight, so I'm going to make sure that I use something with a sufficient bite to loosen them. And then I can go back to my ball end Allen wrench, which gives me a little bit of reach in there. Okay, so we want to remove the two cap screws. Okay, so now we can go ahead and pull the slide up out of the Keihin. As always, be careful not to damage the needle or the metering rod in the case of a SmartCarb. They're pretty precise the way they're ground, so we want to treat them with a little respect. Carburetor's free, so we're going to go ahead and pull it up out of the boots. And we'll have to work it past the chain guard. In this case, the aftermarket chain guard. Next, we want to remove the slide. Sometimes we can gain a little length here by pulling that down. Remove the retainer, the cable. Keep those pieces handy. We'll have to get normally a wrench to loosen this, but it appears this one has not been fully tightened down. Go ahead and remove it from the cap. Okay, your SmartCarb will come to you preset and specific to your application. Normally we ask for a few things when you order your engine modifications, fuel selection, and type of riding and application that you're using it for. Some of the features and benefits of the SmartCarb are its very sleek form-fit factor. You can see as compared to the Keihin and the Mikuni, lots of hoses, variety of things hanging off the carburetor. We have one hose. This is just for the drain. This also allows you to check the float level by checking and looking at the equilibrium in the hose to give you an idea of where the float level setting is. The Some of the compound benefits of the SmartCarb are, of course, the external adjustability. You don't have to get inside, pull plugs, get to jets, anything like that. All your adjustments are made externally through the clicker mechanism and the idle set screw. We have a very unique venting system located at the top of the venturi of our carburetor on the air filter side. This reads air density and manifold pressure that's going through the carburetor as the engine's running, opposed to hoses that are dangling outside of the vehicle in front of a rotating rear tire, throwing dirt and moisture into the system. This is a fully sealed system. It's filtered by the air filter. Nothing can enter the float bowl, and it allows for a very clean fit. The benefit of this is it provides both the altitude air density compensation by reading manifold pressure. It also provides a high velocity push against the fuel to provide top end fueling characteristics that are kind of unique. We'll normally see 600 to 800 RPM of usable over rev using this type of system, and we'll typically see an 8 to 10% performance gain in top end performance. On the KTM bikes that are equipped with either the Keihin 36mm Air Striker or the 38mm TMX Mikuni, they have a heavy molded in rubber ridge that is inside of the air boot that can partially mask our vent scoop by a millimeter or two. We need to clean that out so that this can have a straight shot into the air stream and also to read the air pressure inside of the air boot. Mostly this was due to the Keihin shape, which is thicker at the top, smaller at the bottom, in order to smooth the airflow through a 36mm carburetor. So the inside of the KTM air boot is heavier at the top than it is at the bottom. So we're going to get inside there and trim that bit of rubber out so that we don't have any obstruction over our vent scoop. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pull the air filter, slip the boot out of the subframe, and we're going to grind out this upper edge of this air boot inside on the rubber ridge so that we don't have any obstruction in front of our vent scoop. Now that we've removed the air boot from the subframe, we want to point out the area in question. So inside you can see this very heavy molded rubber ridge. This portion up here at the top, as it is installed in the bike, is the area in question that we want to grind out. So the best way to do that is to take a Dremel and a small barrel sander if you have it. It provides a much smoother way of carving that out as opposed to taking a utility knife or X-Acto knife or something like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and give ourselves plenty of room up here in case we clock or orient the carburetor in a little different fashion than when it's actually installed. So go about 30 to 60 degrees across here and carve that whole area out. Sometimes it's a good idea to kind of clock the carburetor just a little bit so that it can peek around this corner. So during an installation, it's a good idea to maybe rotate this just a little bit. That lets this vent scoop see around the corner radius of the air boot just a little bit better. Not too much, but just enough to give it a little additional sight into the air filter housing. Okay, this is really a simple process, but you want to kind of creep up on it. Give yourself good lighting, fixture it in a vise or something so that it can hold it really good. Kind of envision where that vent scoop is going to be, and then just slowly start creeping up on taking this down. You can always go back over to the bench and fit it onto the carburetor to make sure that you're cutting it in the right place and that you've got enough material removed. Okay, we've got that area blended in really nice, kind of rounded off toward the back. We want to, just provide smooth airflow is what we're looking for. Remove any bits of rubber in here. We'll blow this out really good. We don't want any of this blowing into our vent scoop and causing an issue inside of the carburetor. So we're going to clean that up a little bit and then match it to the venturi of the carburetor to see how it fits. This is a pretty heavy rubber ridge, so there's plenty of material and room to take that off and blend that smoothly to create a nice even uniform airflow into the SmartCarb. It will not compromise the boot. Later, should you choose to take the SmartCarb and move it onto your new bike, the stock fuel system can be put back on and there won't be any problems or anything with having it on there. So now we're going to go ahead and put it on the venturi of our carburetor and see how we've done in terms of cleaning out that area. So as you can see in there, we have a fairly unobstructed view. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's helpful to clock the carburetor just a little bit over in order to give the vent scoop a line of sight around the corner in order to read the air pressure correctly. Okay, so we've removed the 4 cap screws in order to get to the spring, the slide, and the throttle cable retainer. We're going to go ahead and put this on the stock throttle cable. One of the beauties of the SmartCarb is that you can use the stock throttle cable. There's no need to replace it for an inferior aftermarket piece. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and leave the screws in the cap because I have quite a bit of experience, and normally I can just leave them in there. It makes access easier, but if you have fear of dropping them, and I may, but go ahead and remove them out of there. Save yourself some trouble, and you'll just have to work them in after the carburetor is installed under the frame. You want to go ahead and snug this down in the tight position, all the way bottomed out. If we have to make any adjustments, we'll do it at the handset after we install the slide into the carburetor and check our cable end play. So now that we've got that in there, we're going to go ahead and slip our cable spring up over the cable and onto the nose of the cap. Pull that back, a little bit of force, again keeping track of your screws that are in the cap so we don't lose them. Put our cable retainer on and get that spring and everything up far enough out of the way that we can go ahead and slip our cable through the nose of the slide. Okay, now that we've got the spring and the throttle cable retainer on, we need to pass it through the slide and into the retention hole, what we call the spring pocket. So make sure the cable is all the way in there tight, and then we will release the cable and the spring and now have the slide securely fastened. We're going to go ahead and slide the cable again back up through its keepers to give ourselves enough room to work around it and get the carburetor slid into the air boots. So now that we've got our slide and spring on, we want to go ahead and trim off these locating nibs that are designed to help clock the Mikuni or the Keihin carburetor in an upright position. Leaving these on here can bias the SmartCarb and cock it off to the side a little bit, so we want to go ahead and trim them off. We don't want them falling into the engine, so we're going to go ahead and use a rubber boot to fill that in. And then I'm going to take an X-Acto knife and just trim them off flush with this surface so we can slide the SmartCarb all the way in without any pressure or interference against the top of it. Want to gently trim them off of there. Grab them if we can, move them out of the way so they don't by chance fall into the reed block or cause us any problems of getting into the engine later. It doesn't need much, just enough to kind of remove those out of the way, give us a flush surface that we can push the SmartCarb up against. I'm going to trim that just a little bit more to my liking. We're going to want to go ahead and use this retainer for the vent lines on the stock carburetor to hold our drain hose out of the way from the chain or getting into the linkage or the shock. So we want to start that through there. On this particular bike with some aftermarket pieces, we want to pay attention to this chain guard. Make sure we get our carb over the top of it without scratching the anodize on the float bowl. So we're going to go ahead and start working that in there and begin our reassembly and installation. Okay, I'm going to pop it into that air boot. We want to leave it loose for now. I'm going to go ahead and route our vent line down through the swing arm, drain hose down through our swing arm to get it out of the way. Okay. Now we want to rotate the SmartCarb just a little bit, work our cable up, paying attention to our screws that are still in our cap, and begin to install the slide into the SmartCarb. Paying attention to the metering rod especially, to be a little bit careful not to damage it or nick it on anything. I'm going to go ahead and slide everything down in real gently, keeping an eye on our screws just a little bit so we don't lose one, and push our cap down flush. Next we want to go ahead and begin tightening our cap screws down, kind of in a uniform crisscross pattern. No air leaks. We want this cap to seal flat and be tight against the top of the carburetor body. So we'll kind of snug all those down one at a time from side to side. Still need to be overly tight, but we do want to snug them with a little bit of authority. We don't want any air leaks or pulling in any dirt or moisture, mud, anything that could cause any type of abrasion or anything in the slide cavity area. I'm going to use a regular Allen wrench with the proper end, not a ball end, so that we can make sure we get those good and snug. Again, we got to work past the frame here just a little bit. Okay, so now that we're in, we're going to momentarily wait from tightening anything down until we can work this air boot from the air filter side and the subframe back down. So the first thing we're going to want to do is kind of get our clamp positioned as we start lowering the subframe. Again, same way as we took it off, so we don't damage anything or cause any scratching or anything of the shock. I did tighten this pivot bolt, so I'm going to loosen it back off just a little bit so that I can lower that subframe without a whole lot of interference. Okay, so we want to position our clamp on using, with a SmartCarb, we like to put the worm gear at the bottom so that we don't do any deformation or anything on the rubber here to cause any blockage of our vent scoop that we went to great trouble to trim out. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of get this positioned. Pay attention to your pivot over here because it does have a bit of a trouble working past the point of fastening. So we want to kind of get that close. Same way as we took the clamp off, we want to go ahead and slip it in now and get it where it needs to be. One thing that helps a little bit in getting the final fit is to cock the SmartCarb off to the side just a little bit as we push down on the subframe to help clear the shock. There we go. Got our clamp just a little bit low, so we want to go ahead and raise that up. Make sure that we're fully into the air boots without any interference or obstruction, and that we can clamp it down tightly. So I'm going to go ahead and finish lowering that. Now we're going to put our subframe bolts back in before we do our final tightening of the SmartCarb. I'm going to go ahead and snug this one. I'm also going to reach up and tighten my pivot bolt at the same time so I don't inadvertently forget later. Okay. Now, as mentioned before, we want to clock the SmartCarb as much as we can foreseeably. It doesn't have to be perfectly vertical, but we do want to be cognizant of the fact that the vent scoop is going to be somewhat looking around the corner radius of this air boot. So any little bit of additional alignment we can give that to help that see clearly into the air filter housing is a benefit for the way it compensates and adds air density correction. and top end fueling. So we feel pretty good about everything. We're fully in the front air boot. No chances for air leaks. We're going to go ahead and tighten the air filters, the intake side of the engine first, because this is a critical area that we want to make sure is good and snug so there's no opportunity for air leaks. So I've given that a pretty good snug. I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to clock that gear just a little bit of the clamp so I can get it out there where I can reach. And I'm going to go ahead and tighten that down to where I feel that it's nice and snug. You don't need to over tighten these. The best way to check is to just simply try to rotate the carb after the fact and make sure that the rubber is moving completely along with the fuel system. And give that one just a couple more turns. And now we're very firmly mounted. The rubber is moving along with the carburetor, so we can trust that that's probably free of any air leaks. Filter's on tight. We haven't taken it off. Now we're going to go ahead and begin the reassembly of putting the tank, the seat, the silencer, side panel back on. We're going to hook it up to the fuel tank and do our first startup. Okay, now that we've got our tank, side panel, spark arrestor, and seat back on, we're going to go ahead and hook up the fuel for the first time. When the carburetor is sent to you, we put a plug over this just to keep any debris or anything from getting into the inlet, fuel inlet valve. So we're going to go ahead and remove that, pull it out of the way, pull our hose here off the paddle for the petcock. Just something I like to do. Keeps it out of the way. Kind of look in the end of your hose here to see if there might be any little bit of abrasion or pieces of that silicone that might possibly come off. We've had from time to time a sliver of this will come off when it's being installed and it'll cause some flooding issues later, but we want to just double check that. This one looks pretty good. If this looks really frayed, just cut a little piece off and then go ahead and slip it on in place of it. So we're going to go ahead and hook this up. We want to kind of gently work it on there again so we don't shear any pieces of silicone or any debris off into our brand new SmartCarb. Use a pair of pliers that has a nice flat nose so that you can squeeze the clamp correctly. Needle nose don't normally work very well in this case. They'll kind of mess up your clamp. Go ahead and snug that down, kind of get it out of the way so nothing can touch it. Again, we're going to do our first fuel up with the choke open and our warning label still in place. Best way to do that is we just like to turn the petcock open kind of slowly. The idea with having the choke open is to help purge the air out of the float bowl as the fuel begins rushing in. The SmartCarb is a sealed system, has internal check valves. We don't want to drift those up, cause them to shut. So we anticipate that's good. We're going to go ahead and pull our label off and leave the choke open for the first startup. Okay, this wraps up our installation video on the 2019 KTM 300XC. For a long time, KTM recommended your first startups cold to use the Kickstarter. There's several reasons for that. One is when you've attached a new fuel system, if there should have been a flooding incident or something, you don't stand a chance of hydraulicking the engine. Secondarily, when you're kicking with the Kickstarter, all of the energy is going to the coil and the ignition system. So you might find that a lot of times your bike will start a little easier when it's cold if you use the Kickstarter. So we're going to follow those recommendations today. I'm going to go ahead and kick this bike. We'll do our initial run-in for just a minute, and then we'll conclude our installation video. Sometimes a few slow primer kicks are helpful. We've got the choke left on from our first fuel up. Very nice. Okay. Again, your SmartCarb will come to you pre-set up for your conditions, the bike that you're putting it on, your fuel selection, those types of things. So you can rest fairly confident that the settings that we bring it to you with are pretty close to what it should be. We do recommend you run it in for about an hour or so. Just give it time to wear in and give it its best chance before you do make any adjustments if necessary. Again, we'd like to thank Leco for letting us use this new bike. Congratulations on the new owner, and please stay tuned for more tuning videos. Our next installation video will be on a 2007 CR250, and that will help those customers understand the installation and tuning part of the SmartCarb on those bikes. Thank you.